Howdy folks, welcome to another Socialist Telly weekly roundup. With myself, it is Damien Willie, better known as Cornish Damo, accompanied by Steve Walker, Jennifer Forbes and Bonnie Craven this week. Howdy folks, how are you?
Full of cold.
Full of cold, mate. I'm sorry to hear that.
So we've got a busy week and plenty to talk about there. Who wants to kick us off?
Well, I usually do, don't I, mate? I mean, you know what's coming by now. I want to start with Carolyn Harris, as what she's come out with this week is absolutely appalling. Come into the world, my loves, she said about daring to continue to be a lefty, a Corbynite, or as I prefer to call it, just being a socialist. Is there not a housing crisis? Is there not a poverty crisis? Are we not in the grip of the most incompetent government ever that should be being opposed at every turn as they corruptly hand their mates PPE contracts or screw up handling of the COVID crisis as we end up in a third lockdown and can see no end in sight as they look set to repeat again the mistakes of the first two? Is this not the real world, Carolyn? Apparently not, since as Keir Starmer's parliamentary private secretary, you've gone on record as saying under Corbyn, we were selling a vision that nobody wanted to buy. Keir had to come in and get rid of all the nonsense. Well, that nonsense brought a vastly increased membership, paid off party debts, inspired millions and energised people who had never voted before with promises of a Green New Deal, renationalisation of utilities, we paid too much for, etc., etc. Oh, but things like free broadband were nonsense, eh, Carolyn? What a bonus they would be right now to so many. Now, I'll tell you what is nonsense, Carolyn. 10 pledges and a stance of unity as a promise to the Labour membership, because Keir Starmer has delivered the exact opposite of that. How dare you tell us what nonsense is as our members leave in disgust or get suspended at a whim as our coffers run dry? This country needs a Labour government, but not one represented by people this detached from the party. I know there are more serious issues to discuss today, guys, but this intervention by the purple-haired one struck in my craw. How offensive is this to so many people, folks?
Deeply talking about real world issues. And, you know, I venture to suggest that some of the people making those kind of comments haven't had a great deal of real world experience in terms of the problems that everyday, you know, working people are facing every day. Poverty, we've got 4 million children in real world poverty, let's say. We've got another 800,000, probably higher than that now, people out of work as a result of the government's mishandling of the pandemic. If you can't make a noise about those kind of issues, and let's face it, Keir Starmer, Carolyn Harris and the rest of the Labour front bench are not, then, you know, what's Labour for? What's it doing? And can we have our party back, please?
Yeah, absolutely. These issues are not optional extras, are they? They should be the things that we are talking about every day until they are solved. It has to be at the forefront of everything that the Labour Party is about. And I don't accept this idea that we can't talk about them now because of other stuff. I feel like the opposition is we are being boxed in by terms that we don't have to accept. Like people are saying that, you know, oh, because of the pandemic, we can't talk about this stuff. Well, I think it's the opposite. And I think that the opposition are creating this box to hold ourselves in that we don't need to have. Corbyn showed that we can talk about issues and we can change the narrative in opposition, and that is exactly what we should be doing now.
Yeah, the clue's in the title, isn't it? Opposition's job is to oppose. And when we've got a government that are forcing people to self-isolate because of coronavirus and yet live on £93 a week sick pay, and we've got families going without food, we've got kids, even more kids going without food regularly. We've had to debate twice for free school meals for children during school holidays. It's just obscene. All these things need to be called out on the strongest possible terms.
Well, it's the first rule in terms of political debate, isn't it? Don't let your opponent set the narrative. And we haven't just got the Labour front bench allowing the Tories to set the narrative. They look like they're actually reading the Tories' notes and then doing it for them. And in fact, you know, the general tactic, in as far as they've tried to oppose anything, has been, you know, do what you're doing, but do more of it and do faster. And when some of the stuff that the Tories have been doing has been an absolute disaster, we really shouldn't be telling them to get on with it and be a bit quicker, please.
The biggest indicator of that, in my opinion, is the cheerleading for the reopening of schools for all children. You know, we've seen what that did last September through to December. The infection rates and the death rates skyrocketed. And now we're hearing again, even though the case numbers and the death numbers are going down a little bit, they're still considerably higher than they were when we went into our first lockdown. And yet, you know, it's half term this week and there's incredible pressure for schools to return for all children after half term. with the idea that, well, if the teaching staff have had their first vaccinations, then everything's hunky-dory. It isn't. It isn't. People need to have both doses of the vaccine, and that doesn't. So the teachers being inoculated doesn't stop the kids from taking that disease home to their families.
Well, and speaking of the kind of small print on those kind of issues, we've seen the media continuing to push the fact, and the BBC were quite shameless yesterday in describing what a triumph it was for Boris Johnson to have vaccinated so many people already, and hardly anybody has been vaccinated. The number of people who have been vaccinated with 2 doses of the vaccine is still only just about, it's less than 600,000 out of the whole 60 odd million, 1 in 100 people test. Yeah. But they're calling it vaccinated, and then they'll put the little ticker table on the bottom in very small print about have received their first doses. But the PR that's going on by the media on behalf of the government at the minute is talking as if this decision to vaccinate people with 1 dose instead of 2 was the plan all along, and it wasn't. It was a reaction to the fact that they couldn't get themselves geared up enough, fast enough to be able to do it properly. And of course, where there have been successes in terms of the numbers, that's been down to the fact that they've let the bloody NHS get on with it and haven't farmed it out to various private companies or mates who've happened to bung them £5,000 in the past.
Yeah, I mean, you don't say you've completed a course of antibiotics by taking half the pills, and that's essentially what the media narrative has been when it comes to vaccination. And scientists were on the news, I think it's last weekend, saying that with the rates of infection we have, it's still too early to reopen schools. There's been no mention of when schools are going to, actually reopen. There's been some talk from the government that they're going to start reopening about March the 8th, and Gavin Williamson said a while ago that schools will get 2 weeks notice or something like that. We've had the spectacle of Keir Starmer latching onto this date again, sort of as you say, sort of do it faster, do more of it sort of thing, latching onto this date of March the 8th, saying schools must reopen, in a complete echo of his no ifs, no buts, no equivocation speech that backfired on him so badly last year as the infection rates went through the roof off the back of it. So, he doesn't seem to be changing tack or learning a damn thing. But the issue of the schools, rather than our empty suit of a leader, Byline Times on Saturday published a piece showing that sage scientists, the body of scientists advising the government, the people who would, issue the science that the government says it's following, clearly they haven't been following the science, because apparently they advised against schools reopening in September of last year, all the way back in the summer of last year, due to people mixing outside of their households, which of course they'll do in the school environment. And of course, that's exactly what they did. Regardless of what safeguards they might implement, you can't have upwards of 1,000 kids in school at the same time, plus staff, and not have some form of mixing. And they also warned that Christmas could result in explosive outbreaks. And of course, all these warnings were borne out in data by the National Education Union, who were vocal in their warnings against reopening. And, if you can remember all the way back, Becky Long-Bailey, as Shadow Education Secretary, was absolutely on the same page as the NEU over this. And we know what Starmer ended up doing there. On the basis of this Byline article, the government have clearly been lying to us all along about saying they are following the science, and the opposition leader is holding them to their dishonesty rather than holding them to their account. So it's an absolute mess.
I'm really disturbed by this keep fixating on the 8th of March thing. It's like, make a mistake once, fair enough, but keep fixating on making the same mistake is really quite unforgivable. And just on this issue of science, through work, I get involved in lots of health and safety stuff, and I've seen a presentation put out by the TUCs, not by any means a radical organisation. It's very reputable science that they displayed that shows, has long been suspected, aerosol transmission is a significant factor. And in schools, the number of people we've got in a classroom, the number of children you've got in a classroom, it isn't possible to socially distance them anyway, but the amount of aerosol transmission that's going to go on inside that classroom means it's absolutely impossible to stop transmission in a school with the amount of children. Also, because they're not wearing masks. I mean, the only way you could do it would be much less children, all wearing masks, including the teachers, and lots of ventilation. And we're nowhere near that. They're not proposing that as an option. They're just saying, put everyone back in to cramped and dangerous environments, when we know that the infection rate on the current trajectory is still far too high in the community. And the other point that's also really disturbing me at the moment is the Independent SAGE Committee have spoken about the high levels of long COVID, now this has been a bit of a passion of mine as well, but even I was unaware of the amount of people that have been asymptomatically infected with COVID that are developing long COVID, and it's absolutely astronomical. So keep pushing people back, and the sort of people that are likely to be impacted by this long COVID are going to be the ones that are picking up the infections via school route. You know, like parents like my age, we're going to see a lot of people really debilitated, long-term sick, and we know that's at least a year at the moment, but who knows if that is even curable. We don't know if that damage will be repairable. So forcing people back into school on the 8th is unacceptable. We've got to get the infection rates down in the community before we consider it in any fashion.
That's
well, there's that
completely
study
the
as
thing.
well on that topic that said, they looked at kids who'd picked up the COVID virus and found that, half of the kids, I think it was slightly more than half of the kids that had the coronavirus, ended up with long COVID symptoms, and that's children who are supposedly less badly affected by the infection. So, the idea that schools are safe, which Boris Johnson and Matt Hancock keep insisting on, even though it's killed 100,000 and odd people, and rising so far, is just insane. Even in the narrowest possible definition of safe, you're still not safe in sending kids back to school at the minute. Sorry, Bonnie, I cut across you there.
Yeah, no, it's fine. I was going to say though, if you cast your minds back to March and April last year, when the schools were all properly shut down for all but key worker children and the most vulnerable, they had 6 months. It was much discussed. There would be 6 months to put measures in place in our schools before they were to go back in September, if they could go back in September, for either rotas for children to attend, or to acquire and make use of the empty buildings and office blocks that weren't being used by businesses to spread out the location for schools so that class sizes could be considerably smaller. And we saw the rolling out of so-called Nightingale hospitals, which were barely used because they were only usable if each patient brought with them their own medical team, which obviously the hospitals couldn't afford to send out. There ought to have been arrangements put in place by now. We're a year down the line. There really ought to have been arrangements put in place for these empty, unused buildings to facilitate education for our children and a safe space for all the teaching staff to work in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a wasted opportunity, isn't it? Unbelievable.
And the crazy thing is, Keir Starmer's taking this approach, but in the end, it looks like what he's doing is just allowing Boris Johnson and his media allies to continue to set the narrative and give the absolutely crazy impression that he's doing a decent job. We saw that in this recent poll, and I forget which polling company it was, Ipsos Mori maybe, that barely half, only just over half of Labour voters in 2019 would think that Labour would be better at running the country in this crisis than the Tories would be. And that's what happens when you don't say boo to a goose. You're not going to criticise. It allows everybody to go away with the misapprehension that a decent job is being done. And let's just remind everybody, New Zealand, 25 people, and gone back into a full lockdown now because they had, I think, 4 cases over the weekend. And England, what is it, 120,000 now or thereabouts. And the Labour leader, the opposition leader, by title at least, is just not hammering the government on these numbers day in, day out, picking them up on little nitpicky things that really, more to do with like do more of what you're doing, rather than hitting them and saying, look, you've killed all these people. They didn't need to die. What on earth are you doing, and why on earth is the country not holding you to account for it? Well, that's simple enough because the Labour leader isn't doing it.
No, as I said before, we are in the 3rd lockdown now, and the same mistakes are being echoed. The same mistakes are set to be repeated. Open the schools up first, despite them being the biggest vectors of transmission, as they were referred to. It's Einstein called it the definition of insanity to keep repeating the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that absolutely seems to be the raison d'etre of both the government front benches and the opposition front benches right now. And it's gutting because, as members of the opposition party, such as we are, we want to see the opposition party actually proactively opposing. And as we've all said here, it just isn't happening. And every week we end up turning our attention to Keith, because there's never any shortage of things to complain about, sadly. And over the last week, he's tweeted support for Unite the Union, and we wondered if he was feeling all right, and then he went and deleted it, so clearly he was indeed having a moment. He's now flying so many flags, as his next party political broadcast, he'll come dressed as one. His polling is dire. Survation, as an example, which is the one that we all seem to like on the left, because they did so well for us in 2017. They're finding Labour 6 points behind this worst of all Tory governments, and he continues to keep slipping. And instead of turning away from his beige, nondescript positions that he keeps taking, he just keeps digging himself ever deeper. And this time he scraped the centrist barrel so hard, he's gone through it and kept going till he's hit Lucifer's roof, because he's only gone and resurrected Peter Bloody Mandelson, a man who every day has said he seeks to undermine the then Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn and regards the working classes as people who will always back Labour because they've got nowhere else to go. Well, they went elsewhere in 2019, didn't they? In case you didn't bloody notice. And as someone who sought to undermine another democratically elected leader, anyone associating with him is asking to be treated the same way in kind, I think.
I think the major thing as well with Mandelson is the idea that, there's nothing that Labour's going to, there's no chance of Labour getting back into government without getting, well, let's call it the North as a shorthand, but the towns primarily that voted Leave and then deserted Labour because Keir Starmer at the helm of that push, but betrayed, as they would see it, their commitment to honour the referendum result and take the UK out of the EU on a Labour Brexit deal. So we've got Keir Starmer who's created that situation. He's now leading the party and needs to get those towns back. So he brings in one of the guys who was one of the main figureheads and agitators for the whole Open Britain and People's Vote nonsense, as if the first vote wasn't a people's vote anyway. And it's almost, is it like an abusive relationship? There's this issue of, that this abuse towards working class communities, and having betrayed them in the first place, they seem to think that bringing in the people who were at the heart of the abuse is the way to win them back. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, repeating the same thing is not going to work, is it? If it, New Labour had its day and it dwindled into irrelevance. So where is the sense in bringing back somebody who was the architect of that irrelevance that's continued to impact in those communities? That dwindling of the northern vote for Labour, that distrust came from the New Labour era. We want to rebuild that back. Brexit didn't happen in a bubble. The ideas that made people feel like they were being left behind, some of that was planted there by that New Labour kind of ideology that wasn't really speaking to people. So bringing somebody back that doesn't really connect with working class communities anyway, it's not, I just can't see, it's the wrong kind of ideas for the wrong time. What we need now is a fresh approach to some very, very serious problems, and somebody that can understand that and communicate that, and that's nowhere on the horizon is it at the moment. That's why we're actually managing to slip back in the polls against this government. I just cannot believe that is possible. But we've seen that in Scotland as well, aren't we? I'm really fearful that Labour is pushing itself into complete irrelevance. If we carry on going like this, there is literally no point to Labour. If we don't oppose, we don't communicate, and we offer no solutions, what is the point? We need somebody to say there is a reason for Labour. We've got the ideas on the left. We've got plenty of passion. We've got plenty of ideas, and we could get out there communicating with people. But the party is insisting on pushing the left out at the moment, isn't it? And it's a dangerous path. I'm sure we're going to come on to it in a minute, but that's why we need this recall conference, isn't it? Sorry, Bonnie, I talked over you as well.
No, you're okay. I was just going to say, I'm in London. London has long been a Labour city. That it's not just problems for Labour in the north. We've got the GLA elections coming up in a matter of a couple of months. And I think that there are serious issues for Labour in maintaining control of the GLA and keeping a Labour mayor, because what we're seeing as well is a creeping rise of neoliberalism in the people that are representing us in City Hall. We've had, in the last couple of weeks, we've had a notification that Sadiq Khan is supporting a plan to downgrade 2 hospitals in the London region. near me. Where previously he had a 10-point plan. Remember those, these pillars for what he was going to do if he was going to oppose or approve plans for changes and reconfigurations of the NHS. And now we've got a mayor who's doing that. He hasn't seized the narrative of the congestion charge changes that have been forced on him by the Conservative government. He had to accept a number of additional changes and charges to the congestion zone in order to maintain funding for London transport. But the bottom line is, at the same time as the Conservative government doing that, they're handing over billions to privately owned railway franchises. There's no reason on God's earth that those franchises are more needing of that money than Transport for London.
It's very like the situation when Ed Miliband became the Labour leader and decided to reinforce the austerity narrative and accept that, and that it would be a bad idea to challenge it. And we heard John Trickett say the other week that he'd had that conversation with Ed when he was working for Ed in his office as opposition leader, and he said, "I've decided we're not going to oppose that narrative. We're going to accept it," and that allowed the Tories to just cut at will because nobody was saying anything different to what they wanted to create as the received wisdom. And we're in exactly that position now, where the media and the Tory politicians are able to say whatever they like because nobody is daring to stand up and give them an opposite viewpoint. And it's just going to hand them more victories and more power and more opportunities, in the NHS and elsewhere to strip everything that belongs to us.
Yeah, that idea of 10 pledges is going to it's going to turn into, it's going to be centrist talk for I'm about to tell you some lies. At least Sadiq and Keir didn't etch theirs into a stone, though. Shall we be grateful for
Give him time.
But yeah, Jenn makes some absolutely salient points, bringing up Scotland particularly, because our situation there is dire. We're falling behind the Tories in Scotland, for heaven's sake. We're just about at the point of no return in Scotland. We're getting that way in the north of England as well, off the back of the last election. And without some sort of position of what we actually stand for and doing something meaningful that people are going to respond to, and they're going to see, okay, right, they're standing up for us. That makes sense. Let's do that. Let's back them. There's going to be no hope for us. You can't just have this position where the centrists are thinking, let's circle the wagons. We like the leader we got now. Let's hole up. We'll be all right ourselves. But that's not what Labour's meant to stand for. And the membership we have now will not tolerate that. And a return to the days of New Labour. New Labour got away with a heck of a lot of what it did because it didn't have things like this, social media, standing against it. And sadly, everything that they got away with back then, they will never get away with now. And if Mandelson is the answer to Keir's prayers, I hate to ask what the question really is, frankly.
Mandelson's the answer. We're asking the wrong question.
That's the one.
So yeah, and then turning our gaze briefly inwards, and I mean, and I'll just say, because we'll get attacked by some people on this. Well, why are you criticising Labour so much on this thing? We would bloody love to be on here just doing nothing but attacking the Tories.
Oh yeah.
And if only we had a Labour leadership that was allowing us to do that by actually acting like a Labour leadership, then we wouldn't need to be trying to hold them to account as well, because we'd much rather only be fighting on one front.
That's absolutely the thing, Steve. I mean, what we saw while Jeremy was leader was fire turned on us continuously by the same people that are happy to walk hand in hand with the Conservative government. They turned their fire on us, and they're not prepared to do the same thing against the Tories, which I think says it all, really. That's symptomatic of the entire problem that we're facing.
Well, the clearest indicator of that is the fact that three of the worst ones, and I won't name them, but three of the worst ones that were involved in that are now Tory peers. So, well, they would say independent peers, but they're all made peers by the Tories and working for the Tories in various capacities as officials from the House of Lords. So, it was fairly obvious where they're where they were really hanging their hat. But we've seen this fire continued. All the ammunition that they're not firing at the Tories, they're firing on their own members at the moment. And we've seen in the last week or so the Bristol West fiasco, where one of the more kind of most consistently left CLPs, constituency parties in the country, suddenly ends up with a completely right-wing exec after a Zoom held annual general meeting, in which out of 500 and odd people, well over 100 people didn't get to cast a vote. And even in one case, they put both the right and the left candidate for treasurer on the same line of the ballot, so you could only vote for both of them at the same time, and then decided that the right-wing treasurer had won. If that doesn't raise serious questions about the integrity of the process, then you need your head looking at. So and members in that CLP on the right are complaining about the way that the meeting was run as well. But it's sadly, that is not atypical of the way that the members around the country are being treated. So Bristol West might be the case in point this week, but pick any week, you can pretty much point to a group of Labour members somewhere who's getting heavily abused by their people who are supposed to be there to serve them and help them do their job as Labour members better.
Yeah, absolutely. Go on, Bonnie.
Sorry. I was just going to say it's a complete disregard for any form of democracy. We've had the clamping down of free speech in our constituency parties. We've seen suspensions that Howard Beckett and Unite have had to fight against, and so on. It's taking the membership for absolute, for granted, and they're still expecting us all to go out, knock on the doors, make the phone calls, deliver the leaflets for these people that are constantly attacking us. It's like some kind of Stockholm syndrome that they expect us to commit to.
Yeah, Bristol is such a powerhouse of a CLP. So it is a massive CLP, and it's supplied activists for the last couple of general elections. Helped get so many MPs, even MPs where the majority of the membership would be left in Bristol, and they helped to get Darren elected when he'd, and alienated so many of his own CLP. The left members from Bristol went and helped get that MP his seat back when he was on course to lose. And in return, the party is now showing absolute disregard for those members' votes. There's absolutely no reason I can understand why they aren't immediately offering to rerun that AGM. And it's really important for members across the country to stand in solidarity with those members in Bristol, because if it can happen there, it can happen to any of us. And if we want to be a part of a party where we all go out and campaign, like Bonnie said, we need our members more than the other parties do. We need our members to get out and make those votes happen. We have to show respect for our membership, and we have to respect democracy. So I hope that very soon we're going to hear that AGM is being rerun, because there are going to be big problems if they don't.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, Jen, I've got to correct you on that. Solidarity is no longer a Labour value, according to the letter that was sent out to reinstated members who got reinstated under a warning after being wrongly suspended in the first place. Apparently, the Labour value now is doing whatever David Evans says, and to hell with solidarity. So, consider yourself corrected on that.
That Bristol West AGM was an absolute farce, wasn't it? I mean, suspensions all around because, God forbid, solidarity with other members or criticism of the leadership be tolerated. So South West Regional stepped in to run the AGM in Bristol West and proved they couldn't organise the proverbial in a brewery. 6 hours it took. It was 11:30 at night or some such before they even finally managed to finish. Something like 100 members left without ever getting round to vote because, goodness me, we have lives to live. And as a result, one of the largest and most vocally left-wing CLPs in the country now has a right-winger in every single officer's role. There absolutely needs to be an investigation to work out how this farce was ever ratified. And frankly, as you say, it needs to be rerun.
And the situation's got that bad now, and it must be bad that, we've got Labour unions, Labour affiliated unions, at least for the moment, demanding that, the party holds a recall conference to have a chance to, restore, as they put themselves, kind of restore democracy within the party and cease the attack that's happening on members' rights to freedom of speech and to solidarity, that former Labour value.
Yeah, left-wing MPs, trade unions, Labour members, they're all demanding this special national recall conference, a special conference to be held to sort Starmer's mess of a leadership out, frankly. You've got the likes of John McDonnell or Richard Bergen, Momentum, Unite, the Bakers Union, all demanding, demands are going into all CLPs to get the NEC to call for one because they have the power to do so. And I think we can all agree here, essentially enough is enough where it comes to members being suspended, diktat being imposed by an acting general secretary, a war on the left of the Labour Party from its leadership, all from a man who stood on a promise of unity. He's done the exact opposite. So I'm quite excited about this. I think it's high time a nudge was made. I think a very lot of upset members across a lot of CLPs will be looking to send a message and make that demand of the NEC. I certainly hope they are, by bringing this motion to the next meeting. And in fact, in St Ives, where I am, we have forced an extraordinary meeting of our CLP to deal with the issue on Wednesday. So fingers crossed.
Well, speaking of motions, I mean, we shouldn't let the week pass with the weekly roundup pass without making a mention and a little tip of the hat to the Haldane Society of Socialist Lawyers. I mean, lawyers are not exactly known normally as the most radical of people, but they've looked at Keir Starmer, who, and again, those who try to attack what I put out on the subject don't bother to read the article. But it's clear he wasn't in the society; he left it when he became the head of the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, I guess, because he was seen as too close to the establishment even then. But he quit, but he's now been banned from rejoining unless at some point they decide that he's repented enough to actually be called a socialist, because they came out and extraordinarily said, there is actually, he's very clear at the moment that he is not a socialist and therefore he has no place in our Socialist Society of Lawyers. It was quite extraordinary.
Demonstrably not a socialist, that's what they said, is it? And interestingly, somebody from the society that used to be on the executive with him back in the day said that he'd tried to have socialist taken out of the name a long time ago, which is quite telling in itself, isn't it? That's what's happening in effect to the Labour Party. Now is it trying to take socialism out of the party?
So it would be what, out of the society's name, so it would just be the Haldane Society of Lawyers.
That's what he'd tried to get done, apparently, yeah.
Oh dear. I'm sorry, that's just...
I talk about the warning signs being there, really.
What would be the point of a society? I'm sure they've got the legal society, etc. They don't need another one.
Well, the point party. I mean, let's face it, Starmer would make a great leader of such a society, wouldn't he?
Oh dear me. Let's change tack a little bit. We'll look at the mainstream media, because one of the main reasons we exist is because the mainstream media doesn't give space for working class voices, doesn't give space to the left to actually express its views without just getting interrupted every 10 seconds and the Tories get a free ride. But the epitome of a free ride really is that this week the Lord Snooty himself, Jacob Rees-Mogg, MP for the 17th century or whatever they call him, was responded to a question from John Trickett by saying that the idea of poverty, hardship and shortening life expectancy in poor areas was balderdash. And we saw then the BBC decide to cover the fact that he also talked about Weetabix and beans and the fact that he didn't like them. So he can I'm trying to think of the right word, he can heavily disrespect the real life experience of a lot, millions of people, 4 million kids. So, think of the adults on top of that as well, who are struggling with absolutely desperate poverty at the moment and getting worse because of the way that the crisis has been mishandled. Right. And he decides to focus on a fluff item about him, not liking the idea of the makers of Weetabix suggesting that you could eat them with beans for your breakfast. What a state our supposed media state is in at the moment.
Frankly, there's not a worse person who could have come out to talk about poverty anywhere than Jacob Rees-Mogg, because he wouldn't know poverty if it came up and slapped him in the face. And the whole Weetabix and beans story is just such a non-story. It's such utter drivel when you've got poverty up and down the country. The COVID crisis has been as bad as it could possibly be anywhere on the planet, and the flaming mainstream want to talk about Weetabix and beans. It's a disgusting combination. I think we can all agree, but it shouldn't take up BBC prime time. I think the This Morning programme with Phil and Holly were belting on about beans and Weetabix as well. It's their sort of programming topic to talk about. That sort of late morning fluff piece to talk about on a daytime chat show. It shouldn't be covered on the flaming news. I mean, what an absurd waste of license fee payers' money, frankly, when it comes from the BBC.
Well, you could excuse it if it was a slow news day and there wasn't anything else to talk about. But the leader of the House of Commons deciding poverty, it doesn't exist and is made up, is a fairly kind of hefty topic to talk about. You shouldn't consider yourself needing filler items when you've got that kind of thing to talk about. And I'm sure they'd have had no shortage of people willing to come on and say what they thought about it as well.
No.
The deliberate ignoring of the real social problems we've got in this country by our so-called mainstream media, by the BBC and so on, is absolutely unforgivable. I mean, last weekend we had the British Medical Journal, you know, that bastion of socialism and communism, say that, you know, describing the actions of the government as social murder. Now, these are comments that we will never hear on the BBC or in any of our, you know, widely distributed newspapers. But they went on, the language they used, it was social murder, involuntary manslaughter, and political misconduct or negligence. Now, these are all terms and phrases that doctors are prepared to use against this government, and yet our BBC is making excuses for these Tories who are belittling the real lived experience of far too many of our families. Makes me so cross.
And we've seen as well on that, you know, the confirmation now that they've been put in do not resuscitate orders on people with learning disabilities. So if they get sick with COVID, let them die. Doesn't matter. They're not as important as other people. Put your resources somewhere else. Now, I covered this back in, I think it was May or June last year, and flagged up to people that this was being done. And I got attacked by the right and the centrists, so-called, for scaremongering when I said about that. And now here we are, you know, 8 months later, and it's all confirmed again. A bit of a mention in the Guardian, but I haven't seen it be covered anywhere else. No. That, you know, in ways that are absolutely terrifying. You know, that somebody is making a judgment. This person doesn't deserve to live. No. Let's let them die because it's not worth spending our resources on keeping them alive.
And in circumstances where family members and loved ones aren't able to be there to challenge these decisions, it's unforgivable.
Yeah.
Terrifying, isn't it? Absolutely terrifying for everybody, knowing that they are continuing to allow this virus to remain out of control. And the idea of pushing kids back into schools is deliberately allowing the virus to remain out of control at the same time as making these DNR orders. It looks deliberate, doesn't it? It's very hard to see this as anything other than social murder, like the BMJ has said.
Yeah, I mean, it's a testament to your quality as an independent alternative media source, Steve, that you're getting attacked for it, frankly, because I think there's so much collusion between government and the mainstream media to not cover certain things that might be difficult or a little bit uncomfortable for them. And, you know, obviously they don't have that sort of influence over left alternative media. So, you know, our voices, as was said earlier on in this show, are absolutely needed more now than ever before, because otherwise people just won't be informed about this thing. I mean, people do not read the British Medical Journal, if not for programming like Bonnie's, especially. Yeah, these things would not be highlighted at all. So the value of left media is absolutely critical right now. And
well, we saw similar last year as well with the care home scandal. I mean, again, you know, and I'm talking about what I've written and put out because I know that better than anybody else, and I'm not the only one by any means that is breaking these things. But you know, the fact that they were deliberately sending, and still are deliberately sending, people infected with the virus into care homes was again dismissed as fake news and scaremongering at the time, and then subsequently turned out to be confirmed. But the news was, you know, people would get the news 3, 4, 5 months earlier by reading the left media than they would do by listening to anything on the BBC, sadly.
And of course, the question has been asked again this week about whether it's time for the NHS, which is at the core of much of what we've just spoken about. Its time has come, or whether it's time to call it a day, and whether we need to yet again look at an insurance-based system. And of all papers to come out with this one, it was The Independent. I mean, it's not even one of the hard right papers that we're so familiar with, you know, belittling the headlines of, shall we say, because they, you know, trot out so much nonsense. But, you know, our NHS has stood for more than 70 years. It's the ultimate bastion of socialism. It's proof that socialism itself actually works. And we all believe in free healthcare at point of use and wonder why it's so hard to get people to accept that, you know, socialism actually does do great things. But at the same time, you've got to recognize that as much as it was, they might want it gone because it stands in stark proof that their greed is God, and they think of the NHS as it stands is a testament that their political beliefs, their capitalist, you know, wants are infallible. That actually something does stand against it. and the NHS has stood because people have always fought for it. But sadly, over successive years, nobody's voted to keep protecting it, and we're now looking at another reform of the NHS from Matt Hancock. And reforms are supposed to indicate some form of improvement, but in the case of Conservative reforms, it inevitably means more privatisation.
It's the most terrifying word in the Tory mouth, that one. When they want to reform something, it's on its way out normally.
That's it.
On the positive, let's spend last 10 minutes of the show talking about a couple of positives that have happened this week. I mean, on the one big one is that we've seen Howard Beckett, who's a friend of this of Socialist Telly, launch his official campaign to become the next General Secretary of Unite when Len McCluskey eventually retires. And from our point of view, that's a good thing. And I want to put in, I did a little video saying why I thought people should support Howard for that position, but I want to put in a quick word for Howard Beckett on that. I've known him now quite well for a number of years, and I've seen him in operation, behind the scenes. A lot of people don't get to see. I haven't seen anybody that's understood the value of solidarity and of loyalty to people better. But the thing that's impressed me the most about Howard Beckett, I think, in the last couple of years that I've seen him working on industrial actions from Birmingham bin strike onwards, is that he will, even to his own detriment, he will make sure that the grassroots people working on a campaign get the credit when we win. When Unite wins a victory, it's all about the people, working on the front line, the organisers in the local area, winning that victory. It's not about Howard Beckett and the part he's played, even though that's been substantial. And I have to say, I haven't seen that necessarily from anybody else who's in the frame for that position. And some people will, try and attack Howard on the basis that, the one group within the union decided that they were going to, back another candidate. But that process deprived, more than enough people of their vote who would have backed Howard. And there were serious questions about that have basically been swept under the carpet. So, in terms of the left's candidate who's going to do the best job and stand up to, the Tories and to the red Tories at the moment, in terms of the way that they're treating and mistreating working people. To my mind, there's only one candidate in there that we need at the head of the Unite Union, which is the biggest one in the United Kingdom and Ireland, second biggest just in the UK.
Yeah, Howard is a legend. He's an absolutely brilliant guy. I had the pleasure of conducting the very first live interview he ever took part in. It was the first live interview I ever took. So Howard has always been, a special person to me and a great mate. But professionally, this is a guy who has been in part of the Unite Union, the trade union movement for years and years and years in his capacity as a lawyer. Rarely as a trade union member, actually risen to the prominence that Howard has in recent times. Also a member of the Labour Party ruling body on the NEC. So you've got a guy here who essentially has all the experience it takes to run a trade union and all the political nous as well to play a part politically within the Labour Party with it. And Howard has he's got good reason for rising to the prominence he actually has. Because he spent years he's fighting for solidarity, for collectivism, for action as a movement in the workplace and within the Labour Party, and he's got the experience and competence in both to do the job. These are exactly the right reasons to be elevated as he has. There simply isn't another candidate like him. There's not another candidate who frankly holds a candle to him. So I sincerely hope people really do get behind the Unite Unity Left's endorsement and really push Howard to take this position, because he's the real deal. This is exactly the kind of leader you want for one of the biggest unions in the country, to take it forward with a socialist agenda at heart.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that going back to that point that Steve made about promoting the grassroots that have been involved in an action, it's so essential, isn't it, to build in an organising union, to make sure that you give the prominence to the activists that did that. So that gives me a lot of reassurance about the way forward for Unite. But I've seen him Howard speak quite a few times, and he is a rare voice in politics at the moment that is willing to challenge the establishment, and living in such scary times and not having people that are willing to hold that cosy establishment that is now developing in British politics to account. We need that on behalf of British workers. We need somebody that's going to stand up for the working class, and I think that Howard is the man to do that. So I'm very happy to get behind him, and I hope that other people do. There are other candidates on the left, and I think if it ends up being like 3 candidates on the left, that will be a good thing. But if that's not the case, we need to make sure people understand what's at stake early on and get behind a candidate that can really deliver for all of us.
I completely agree. I mean, Howard is, you know, he is a socialist lawyer. He does belong in that society. And, you know, this is a guy who lives and breathes the socialist values of our movement. You know, it is a pity, though, that he's not running for leader of the Labour Party.
Well, it'd be a tough call between him and Rashford, really, wouldn't it? But the other interesting thing that's happened in the past week has been some very interesting endorsements in the Liverpool mayoral, well, not the mayoral campaign as yet, but the campaign to become the Labour candidate to be the mayor of Liverpool. And you know, we've seen Unite, after what I understand was a really tough internal battle with some of the kind of more machine left, if you like, who were trying to organise endorsement for somebody else. But we saw Anna Rothery, who's come across, I think, as the strongest left candidate in that the 3 women who are up for that nomination, be backed by Unite Union. We've seen Jeremy Corbyn come out and back her. We've seen Ian Lavery, one of the big figures on the left, come out and back her. We've seen Jenny Formby, the former general secretary of the party, and another really strong socialist, come out and back her. So I think that race there is getting very interesting, and what the person who might have been considered the establishment favourite to win that nomination this week is now looking under threat, because we've got somebody with a more, you know, out and out left position coming through and getting some really big endorsements.
Yeah, for the supposed underdog, she's really making her mark right now, and I, for one, couldn't be more delighted. She was brilliant to speak to interview. If anybody hasn't seen the interview I conducted with Anna Rothery, they really do need to see it, because this lady is absolutely the real deal. She's got the heart, the passion, the nous to do that job, and she is socialist to the core. What an opportunity for Liverpool here right now. I mean, she just really is the ideal candidate for it, and I really do wish her all the best.
You know, it's important. It's you know, it gets called the reddest city in the UK, and I suspect it probably is. You know, apart from football sense, where there'll be a few Blues who might disagree with that. But you know, to have a city like Liverpool with a proper left winger as a mayor, standing up for socialist principles, as in so many things, will show that, you know, where Liverpool has taken the lead and shown the rest of the country what can be done with the food banks issue, and, you know, the right to food and all the other stuff which is catching on around the country now. We've got a chance for a real red city to be standing up and saying, look, this is what, you know, what left politics is about. This is what we stand for, and it's not, you know, it's not about the issues of you know, unsuitable conduct, let's say, that have been alleged in you know, when a right winger gets into control in a Labour city, it's bad news for everybody, really. Sorry, guys, you're a long way from Liverpool, so that's probably not as interesting for you. But you know, I think it's important. There's a number of mayoral races going on. We've seen machine politics take over by the right and exclude any left-wing candidates from the city of Bristol, and you know, from the Labour nomination. So, you know, again, it's important, I think, that we get a win in the column there for the left, and Liverpool hopefully is going to be the place to do it.
I think in London we would have benefited from a challenge to the Labour candidate. We had the option to vote for a reselection or not. Personally, I think that mandatory reselection is preferable. It shouldn't be considered that an elected person has a job for life. Councillors have to be reselected each time they stand. Why should it be any different for mayors or for MPs, in my view? And I think had we taken that chance in London, we might be seeing a Labour candidate that could absolutely wipe the floor with the Conservative candidate is absolutely horrendous in my book. The Liberal Democrats, I think, are on their third option for candidate for London Mayor. We ought to win it easily, but I'm just concerned we've got the wrong person leading the fight.
Jeremy Corbyn for mayor, anybody?
Yes, please.
Yes, do it.
It would be a complete walkover if he was to stand.
Okay. Anybody want to put the last minute in before we round up the show?
Well, I guess I want to give you guys a massive thank you, actually, for pushing me into setting up this Patreon that's just been set up. If nobody saw it yesterday, Steve put together a brilliant article and a 2-minute vid of Damo best bits, I suppose you could call them. But it's a brilliant video to do so. So, you know, it's in the Squawk Box article and across social media. And I wanted to bring attention to the fact of why I actually gave in the end, because I resisted doing this. And I've never hidden the fact that I'm what's called an unpaid carer. I think it's a rather poorly defined and understood term, since what it basically refers to is somebody who's had to give up work to care for a loved one. And in my case, I care for 2 loved ones. My wife suffers from fibromyalgia, which is a quite poorly understood condition which leaves you in permanent pain and with mobility issues. My daughter has spina bifida and has mobility issues with that. And an unpaid carer, you do sort of get paid in that you qualify for something called carer's allowance, which amounts to £67.25 a week. So it's less than a job seeker gets, despite having to care for somebody for more than 35 hours a week to get it. So you're basically working a full-time job, essentially. It's going up by 35p in April. Don't spend it all at once. It doesn't matter how many people you care for either, be it 1, 2 or 3, that is all you get. You can only get £67.25. And worse is the fact that the disability premium of the person you are caring for gets taken away from them to pay for it. So essentially, we're no better off for me claiming it. I get some national insurance stamp paid towards my state pension. And that's the only incentive really to claim it. And, you know, we live in the same household, so we haven't made a net loss. But imagine if the disabled person for whom the carer is not resident, that's 60 odd quid that the government take out of that disabled person's household income to pay for it. And it's not like disabled people or carers have a choice in this matter either. You know, contrary to what some assessment questions might ask you, you can't decide to just not be disabled. And the carer doesn't give up work out of choice. We do it. There's tens of thousands of us up and down the country. We do it out of necessity. And sadly, that means the government's got us over a barrel. We have no leverage. We can't go on strike. So they can dish out this ridiculous sum of money and say, be grateful for it. And families like mine were ignored up until that 2017 Labour manifesto, which promised to immediately uprate carers' allowance to that of job seekers. And then, of course, to increase it in recognition of the fact that it is a full-time job. But of course, that's now gone. And, you know, so as I said, for a long time, I resisted the idea of trying to finance myself through what I do on social media. I used it as an outlet, as something cathartic for me to do. And these guys know how hard-headed I can be, but there was this side of things where I didn't want to hide any of my work behind a paywall either, which you can do on Patreon. It's not a very socialist thing to do. I don't want to hide my work from people. I want as many people to see it as possible, challenge the mainstream narratives. But I simply can't do a normal full-time job because I already have one. But I have this platform, and that's increased. And as I've collaborated with this wonderful team here on Socialist Telly, you lovely people, I've given in. I finally decided we're going to give it a go, but we're going to do it the socialist way, where the only support I'm going to get for my work will be those freely offering it, who enjoy what I do and wish me well and want me to keep going. And I'm grateful to all those who have already signed up as patrons. I hope more will come, and I will definitely aim to keep giving you more content and more value for money. So I just wanted to explain a little bit more in depth about the day in the life of an unpaid carer, and basically to say thank you to everybody I work with here on Socialist Telly for giving a damn about me.
And I'll just, I'll finish off on that with saying that, Socialist Telly is provided completely free. And, and that's a policy decision. We do that. But, there are people involved with it who need help and need support for the effort they put out. And Davo is one of the people who, who purely on, even on talent basis, let alone need, would be worth supporting. And I found him endlessly entertaining. It was good fun putting that clip together with with what could have been much more than a 2-minute selection of his best bits. So I do follow him as well on Twitter, and I'll get their Twitter handles so everybody can follow them there as well. And thank you for joining us for this roundup. It's been a busy week. Apologies, we've been slightly late. There's been a few circumstances stopped us getting it done over the weekend. But follow us in a week or so's time to see what else has been going on. And make sure you follow Socialist Telly on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube. Thank you very much. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Cheers.
The guys to send me at the end of